What will be your biggest challenge as an organization going forward in a post-COVID future? Going paperless. Good. You can type in anything you want. Interesting. We haven't talked about real estate. That could be a whole nother panel. Customer employee engagement. And digital and physical. Motivation. So quite a few on the, some around process, some around mindset shift. Any reactions to some of these, Sarah, Roger, you're seeing?
I mean, many of them definitely resonate for me. The older leadership is interesting. We had actually, we conducted a couple of surveys during the crisis specific to COVID and how the organization was responding. And we asked a question around when people, or if people would feel comfortable returning to the office. What we found was more of our older workers said they would be more comfortable to return, but didn't really want to return. And our younger workers said they weren't comfortable returning. A lot of that was rooted in mass transit and other issues, but that they really wanted to return. And so, you know, it was really interesting to dig in and even look at some of the generational differences around what people were dealing with. You know, my own personal situation, all of a sudden I was at home with a spouse that was also working from home who typically travels during the week, 2 children that were being homeschooled and doing distance learning. And all I wanted to do was get out of my house and get back to the office. But everybody's experience was very different in what they were dealing with and some of those constraints. And the office one, I think, is fascinating. We had a focus group this morning. Scott knows because he's helping us on some of our future of work conversations. And we put up a question and asked people to vote on the side they felt was more true. And the 2 sides were the office for the future, the office is dead or the office prevails. And we made people pick a choice. And some of the comments around the why were actually fascinating. There's a big divide there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it really does go back to industry and even region of the world in terms of behaviors and attitudes. Like we did some roundtables with law firms, and the divide there was enormous, right? So you had older law firm partners that just could never see a world where mentoring an apprenticeship as part of that journey, and that has to be done in a physical way, right? They couldn't let go of that. And then younger partners were like, no, of course we can do it, right? Of course we can do an apprenticeship in a virtual world. So it is a little bit, you know, less about age and more about how entrenched your mindset is and how willing you are to pivot off that. I don't know, Roger, any reactions?
Yeah, a couple. I'll tag on to the space issue, and then I would like to just make a couple of quick comments on culture and engagement. On the space issue, you know, that's how we need to think about it as well, is thinking of the physical space as one alternative that everyone has, and it could be many different alternatives. And the challenge that we have and is the paradigm because I know most everyone has their organization say this, but we say, well, we're an organization built on relationships, and you hear that just time and time again. So it feels like it's pretty trite, but there's some wisdom under that in terms of building, our company's built on relationships. And so how do we use the physical space to maintain that development of relationships when we're going to be in a much different future of work and a different way of working? And so we're trying to wrestle with that and sort of challenge some old paradigms around how that gets done and what physical space gets used, how physical space gets used to do that. And then on the paperless, I think a couple of people mentioned paperless, which was, we were kind of forced into that because based on our regulatory requirements and some of the liabilities and regulations we have about personal health information, we're not allowed to print at home off of our computers, our company computers. So we were all forced to go paperless unless you wanted to wander back into the office and take your chances of going back in there with a mask on and all of that. So it forced us to go paperless in a very short period of time. Last piece on culture and engagement, I think that's an important part, and that's the other thing that we're wrestling with is how do we maintain that engagement and the cultural elements that were some of the best around what we did around our purpose and in fact, one of our values is thrive together. And so how are we rethinking that value when we're not together and not physically in the same place a lot for either big, large meetings that are common in our company to just being on the same floor in the same workspace. And I'll just give you one idea that, a lot of our meeting rooms are huddle rooms, and so there are 5 to 6 people, and we're thinking about turning those into really, really high-end studios because we already have the video equipment in it. And if you can't cram 6 people in a room, not anytime soon, how do we turn those into almost production studios for leaders or 1 or 2 leaders to really reach a big part of their audience and a big part of their teams and large parts of their organization in an environment that's much more stable and reliable than working from home on something like Zoom. And so we're rethinking some of those ways that we're using physical space to then bring our culture even more alive and engage our associates as well.
I actually think that's Roger, that's a fantastic point. Actually, I love that idea. I'll probably steal it from you. But I think that's actually an excellent point around not just thinking about the home being where we need to support virtual stuff and the office being where we need to support physical stuff, but how you actually do both. And we're starting to explore a lot of these contradictions that are coming up, brought to us, because of the crisis around how can we, be far away, but still feel like we're near, and trying to solve for those contradictions in the best way possible, and really thinking that virtual physical. So it's not an either or you only do virtual here and you only do physical here, but how you can actually do them both in different ways.
Yeah, I think the key message from both of you, which we're hearing also from other kind of progressive companies, is we're definitely not going back to the old way, but the new way will probably be some balance. And in many ways, the opportunity, but also the challenge is the expectations will be higher. The expectations will be that both customers and employees will be able to choose where to turn the dial on what's the optimal mix for them personally in terms of virtual, physical engagement, and to your point, how they can mix and match those to achieve the best outcome, achieve the most productive environment. And I think, you look at some of the tools out there that even, Zoom's great and all that stuff, but moving to the next version, right? So you look at Oblong Mezzanine and Spatial and these platforms that could allow us to move to 3D and even tactile interactions. It's pretty exciting because those might also advance and bring a little bit of the physical to the virtual and vice versa. But there's lessons to learn from not only retail, which we talked about before, but look at what's gone on in education, right? So there was this period of time where everybody said online education is going to blow up education. And universities were all scared about MOOCs and massive online courses. And of course, the universities aren't exactly the most innovative platform or sector, but at the same time, what you realized was the students didn't want just online education. They wanted this balance. And that's why you see most of these models netting out of some balance of online and physical. And even I think where we'll go after this crisis will be some balance. And that'll be probably very consistent with how the work experience is going to change.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, my children are very worried that there will be no more snow days ever in their future. So
yeah,
that's a big debate in our house.
I think workers are saying the same thing.
Well, Scott, just to tag onto that on the education side, I was reading an article over the weekend about the success and not of MOOCs. And one of the real interesting points in there is that a lot of the studies they've been doing on online learning is that the ideal online learning, we're thinking about a 1 to several hundred. And we're thinking about the models of scaling online learning, and it's actually creating the best of all that to say, no, we need to use online learning to figure out how to create the intimate experience that you get in a class. So I don't know how that plays out, but it's just an interesting way that we're blending this need to be connected with the digital tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, it will truly be about delivering personalization, the best of personalization. So we had a couple questions coming in from the audience. One was, more practical around, I think, Sarah, you started to get at this. What if people aren't set up to work virtually in their home, or don't have the best bandwidth situation, or even working environment physically to set up? How are you dealing with some of that?
Yeah, and that's a significant challenge, both in more developed parts of the world. So I know certainly we dealt with it where even in the developed parts of the world that had access to Wi-Fi and other things, for all of our employees to be on our network at the same time created some tension and created some challenges when we first started this journey. And so we had to pivot very quickly. But then in addition to that, we have a huge number of our workforce that are based in India. And when their work from home orders got instituted and many of them had to work from home, the infrastructure in the country is just not there to be able to support that. And so that was a significant challenge. And one of the things, if we think about organizational resilience that we're starting to do now, is think about how do we support a more distributed workforce based on some of these challenges, either our own internal infrastructure challenges, where we need to have enough VPN capacity to be able to support a large number of our workforce being remote. And then what's our role in helping support our workers that might be in a less developed location, where because of external factors, they're not able to have the setup that they need. So it's an ongoing challenge. We haven't figured it out, but I do think we've learned a lot through this process and are now on a road to be able to put some of those things in place.
And Roger, you hit on culture and purpose, and even communication by leaders. How important is that when you potentially could have this divide in your workforce? So the people that have to go on the front line that might even be resentful of the people that can work virtually. How do you keep everybody glued together?
Yeah, it's interesting, and so a couple of things there that kind of goes into your question. The way that we are doing that now is we have about 2,000 employees who have to be at work. They're in our pharmacy distribution centers, and we have to make sure that our members and our customers are getting their prescriptions during this time, and through mail order means and some other things. And so we have done some things with that group and recognized them. And it reminds me a little bit of my days when I was at Walmart, where the store employees were the most celebrated in the company, still are today, because you can't close the doors. And so the employees that we have in our company that can't close the doors, and it's not just pharmacy distribution, we had our data centers and some other areas where we really had to accommodate that. But an interesting thing, Scott, as I mentioned, that we had a fairly significant section of our workforce that was already working home and working remotely. What we found is they actually felt more included and more engaged when everybody else had to go work at home. Because when you have, if you just think about it, and it's obvious once you stop to think about it, if you have a team of 5 and 3 are in the office and 2 are trying to dial in from remote places, if you're dialing in always remote and you only get to fly in once a month or once every other month to see your teammates, it's not always easy to feel included. Once everybody had to go home, the work at home or working remotely employees felt much more part of the team. And it was just an interesting dynamic. So I think the heart of your question is that in this new environment, how do we continue to engage and reinforce the elements of our culture? And I don't think we've solved that yet. I think right now we're just relying on sort of over-indexing in communication and bringing people's personalities to life using virtual means, because it's not an easy, it's a pretty flat medium to try to do that. And so we're trying to do more of that in terms of, sort of just connecting people. But we're still solving that. We're still in the middle of this. And as we go through, we went through response, we're sort of in recovery, and then it's going to be moving to sort of reimagine and resilience and those kinds of things. And just to echo what Sarah said and just add one thing, is that one of the things that we're thinking about on not necessarily the countries where the infrastructure is a problem, but even our workforce, is really even rethinking their equipment issues, where we now are devising sort of bundles, these mobile bundles, whether you're in the office after this phase passes or not. We've got to make sure everybody can pack up and move, because we don't know when a resurgence will hit or the next kind of crisis will cause us to do that. And we have natural disasters and so forth, but we're rethinking the whole technology piece to say,
you need a home office in a box kind of
thing. Even if, we had people carrying desktop towers out to their cars when we were moving everybody home. And so just these really fluid bundles of double monitors and all that you can move and relocate very easily, or use a third party to do that, is kind of the way we're thinking about it.
Sarah, do you think this is an opportunity? Roger hit on leveling the playing field, and certainly we've seen it a little bit. Even in our firm, we ran a hackathon at Heidrick, and some voices got heard and actually had input into that, and got to collaborate with people across the globe that might have been in the back seat, right, in the dark shadows of the organization that popped out. Do you also think that gets pushed further in that traditional talent hubs, that people will now maybe push into less, more underserved cities or areas to develop skill sets and tap into talent pools that otherwise couldn't have been accessed that easily because you didn't have physical locations there? You see that happening more?
I think there's certainly, as organizations are thinking about the future, one of the things that we're seeing as a benefit is that if we can support a more distributed workforce, we can tap into talent that could sit anywhere. And what the other thing that we're hoping is that this will also help us on our diversity and inclusion fronts, so that we can go out and get the best talent wherever they're sitting, and not be concerned, Scott, to your point, that we don't have a major hub there, or we don't have an office, and we really need them to come into that office. I think the challenge, though, I hope that that's true. I think time will tell. The skeptic in me says that I think one potential negative impact of this crisis is that we go back into this split model where we have, say, half of our organization in the office, half working remote. And so you don't have a level playing field. And we know from a lot of research that typically is what impacts culture the most. It leads to less productive teams. And so how do we balance that, where we may have some people whose preference is to come into the office and that they prefer to work in that mode, and then we have other people that would prefer more to work more remotely. And I think that's where the challenge comes in. How do you support both if you want to, but then what is that right mix? And if you're going to go with some sort of hybrid structure like that, what does that mean to your culture? What does that mean to your leaders who might have some people in an office and some people not?
And maybe those tours of duty, to your point, become a way to stitch people together, which could be interesting. Yeah. How about you, Roger? Anything to think about that?
Yeah, we're distributing our hubs in various locations to do exactly what you mentioned. I think we're going to hit a place where we have a set of identified hubs. So it won't be anybody anywhere, but it'll be, think of, we need a vice president of X, and you can live in any one of these 5 places or any one of these 8 places. And then, so we will do this sort of talent hubs, but in very strategic locations, and then give flexibility within that. And then the other thing that we're doing is starting to create distribution even within the larger cities that we have. So how can we have these sort of outposts where people can go and spend time and they're not commuting into the downtown tower or things like that. So we're distributing throughout the country, mainly in the US. We do have some offshore and international presence, but it's mostly in the US. But we're locating in talent hubs to give that kind of talent flexibility, but also get access to talent that we didn't have before. And then within our larger cities, we're sort of doing these smaller outposts where people can go in and get access and connect with people and do those kinds of things in a way that's a little bit easier.
Cool. Yeah. And by the way, please chime in your questions either on the chat line or Q&A. We had a question specifically about onboarding new young employees. What are you doing differently in this world as we figure this out to make that experience great, but also get them on the right path?
Yeah. Well, I actually think this is a good example of not just trying to take what we used to do in the office and moving it to virtual. So we completely redesigned our onboarding experience, taking into account that we needed to be able to do it virtually. So equipment is now shipped to our individuals' offices, homes, for them to use. I was actually talking with a woman today who started with us in May, and I was asking her about her experience, and she was sharing, and she said, the one weird thing for me is I don't have a badge. Like, I don't have a badge that says Mastercard, but I have the computer, and I have, we send our people actually these, talk about physical and virtual. You would think we would go completely virtual, but they get it like a little pouch with a little welcome to Mastercard and a notebook and some physical things that they can actually touch so that we're connecting with them on both the physical and the virtual. The other thing, and I think this is an obvious thing, but we don't always do it, is just the importance of communication and connection. And so for all of our virtual hires, we're doing much more outreach now to get them to come to sessions with our CEO and other members of our management committee, to get them looped into some of our business resource groups that might be most relevant for them. So to really just try to help break down some of those obstacles that we probably had in the physical world too, but trying to make that virtual onboarding and then being able to develop relationships a little bit easier. And some of the work we're doing now, because many of our offices are going to be returning in a return to office mode, is thinking about, for those individuals that were virtually onboarded, what happens when they come back to the office for the first time? Because they've never set foot in one of our offices before. So what does that experience have to look like for them, which will be different for me, who had been working from the office?
Yeah,
Cool.
just to tag on to that, we're doing much the same things. And we had started this before the pandemic and certainly have accelerated it. But we have extended that whole onboarding and sort of redesigned that from sort of an agile team standpoint. And now when and we hire north of about 12,000 employees a year, but everyone, regardless of your level, gets a outbound call the minute you verbally accept. And that call comes to you and says, "Welcome to Humana. We're so glad to have you. I'm your personal concierge." And it's a light touch kind of concierge that uses digital tools to connect that new employee to the company. And so once they verbally accept, within 24 hours, they have an outbound call, and they have a digital assistant basically to help them onboard. And then that flows through to some of the things that Sarah mentioned. And then for executives, I mean, we have not slowed some of our hiring during this time, and many employees, if not all of certain levels, have been hired completely virtually. We've now had a number of executives that have been hired completely virtually. And if they had any meetings, it was probably one meeting in a park somewhere 6 feet apart from their future hiring manager. But I'll be quick. But we're now getting them together in cohorts to go through the deep dives into the company and the business model and the operating model and the kinds of things that you would expect if you were on site and in person.
Well, I know we're coming to an end. I think one of the things that is amazing about both your companies is the employee experience is as valued and important as the customer experience. And that's not where a lot of companies are, but you're seeing now, especially in a virtual world, that kind of attention. And you guys actually have people focused on delivering a great employee experience is probably going to be a differentiator, right? And who wants to work for you in this kind of world. Dean, you want to bring us home here?
Sure, happy to wrap it up. Roger and Sarah, thanks so much for joining us and for all of your insights. It was really terrific to have you. And, you think about the benefits of this, we're able to plug into folks like you, experts in your field that transcend geographies. And again, we're grateful to have both of you participate here and for your support. And Scott, thank you to you and your leadership globally in what you're doing around digital transformation, and really appreciate your leadership with PACT within Forum. So thank you.
Thanks, team. Cool.
And certainly not last but not least, I want to thank Suzanne Lentz and Anexinet. Suzanne serves again as their Chief Marketing Officer, and Anexinet is co-lead host along with Fairmount Partners of Forum.